Hello, kiddies. It's me, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. You're listening to Drop the Mic.
Roses are red, violets are blue, but the iris is the flower that will mean the end of it.
You can run from Suspiria. Suspiria. You can hide from Suspiria. Suspiria. But you cannot escape. Suspiria. The only thing more terrifying than the last 12 minutes of Suspiria are the first 92.
Welcome back to our Spooky San Diego podcast. We are your hosts, Wesley Swanson and Chris Pawlak, and thank you for tuning in to Drop the Mic. This week, we talk about the original Suspiria in celebration of Halloween in October 2023. So sit back, pop in those headphones as we take you on a trip back to the Technicolor madness with episode 337, Beware the Mother of Sighs. What's up, Chris? How are you?
Very, very busy, man. I'm happy to sit down and do this episode with you, but as you know, it was really pushing it for me to get my notes and research done and for me to sit down and watch the movie, because as busy as I was when we did LA Confidential last month, like I was so much more busy this month, or so much busier this month than I was in September. I've been working 12-hour days, 6 days a week sometimes. So I'm glad that we're able to get this in and have it ready for Halloween. But after the show, like, it's going to be a nice respite to relax and chill out, because my work schedule has gone back to normal this weekend. Oh. So it's going to be nice to kind of get back to that and be able to come home at a decent time.
And now for a special news report, brought to you by Drop the Mic.
Did you have any news for us this week?
Just the list of deaths about as long as my arm here, which is kind of becoming what you and I talk about in the news now.
Yeah, it's like, unfortunately, never ending. It seems like within these past couple years. I know there was a big one just last night. Yeah. We'll lead with that. Matthew Perry. I never was a Friends fan, so I can't talk that up. But I mean, you know it. You know who he is. If you all those Friends fans out there, Chandler. But I did want to shout out The Whole Nine Yards, because that's a pretty solid movie, and he's pretty great in it. Playing opposite Bruce Willis. So I do want to shout that out. Serving Sarah, which isn't a great movie, but he and Elizabeth Hurley are pretty great together. He was in, was 90210? I think so. Yeah. Before Friends. I think he had done some TV stuff before Friends. And I have to look through and see what else he was in before that, because I remember being familiar with him when that show started. Like I had seen him on something else. I don't know, Married with Children or something. Something like that, because I kind of knew who he was. I also want to shout out, there was a really weird show called Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip from like 2005, 2006. That was like an Aaron Sorkin show, like behind the scenes of a Saturday Night Live type show. It wasn't that great. It was kind of like Aaron Sorkin sniffing his own farts for that show. But it came out the exact same year as 30 Rock, which had the same premise, only 30 Rock was a straight comedy. And 30 Rock is brilliant and so much better than what Studio 60 was.
And Studio 60 only lasted a season. But it's kind of an odd show if you can track it down to check out. It was him and Bradley Whitford were like the head writers of this show. So we'll shout out him. Shout out Richard Mull.
Oh, yes.
Who died this weekend as well. If you've ever watched Night Court, like back in the day, he was great. He was the Bailiff Bull. In that, he was also Two-Face and Harvey Dent on the animated series, on the Batman animated series.
Yep.
And shout him out in a really great, underappreciated movie, although I think it's like a cult film now. But I'm a Cheerleader. He's in that, and he's very fucking good in that. And if you haven't seen But I'm a Cheerleader, watch that. It's pretty great. With Clea Duvall and Tasha Leone. One of our favorites, Melanie Linsky's in it.
Is that, do you know if that's streaming anywhere?
I believe it's streaming on Max. Streaming on Roku and Tubi. And, I mean, you can always hook it up through Prime Video, too.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, if people out there haven't seen that movie, watch it. It's great.
He also, Richard Mull has a great cameo in Scary Movie 2.
That's right.
He's the ghost. Or one of them.
Yes. He's the ghost that doesn't he race David Cross?
Yeah, in the wheelchair.
Yeah.
They do the MI2 reference with the dove.
Hey, man, I've said it before. I'll say it again. I think the Scary Movie 2 is better
than the first one?
Than the first one. It's got some really great laughs in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chris Elliott stuff always kills me. So, yeah, check that one out. Who else? Richard Roundtree.
Yes.
Passed away. I mean, iconic role in Shaft, but I did want to shout out his, he's really fucking good as the DA in 7. He's only got a couple of scenes, but he's really good in 7. And then he was on TV, did some Alias episodes. I'm a huge Alias fan. And then some Heroes episodes when Heroes was still good for that one season.
Yeah, the first, right.
Yeah. The only season that exists. So shout him out. Want to shout out Burt Young, who died. You know him as Paulie in Rocky. He's fantastic in Rocky and its subsequent sequels. He's in Rocky Balboa, but he had died by the time Creed had come around.
Mm-hmm.
In the universe, he had died, so he's not in Creed. But he's really good in those Rocky movies, especially the first one, and he's pretty great in Rocky Balboa. He's in Chinatown. He's great in Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield. So shout him out. Suzanne Summers, Three's Company, which is probably her best known role, and then Step by Step.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of your generation might be familiar with, because that was like one of the TGIF staples for many years.
Alongside Family Matters, right? I believe.
Family Matters. I think Full House was in that TGIF lineup. And then something else. Boy Meets World, probably.
I think Boy Meets World.
That might have been like the super solid TGIF lineup for many years, was like those 4 shows, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And then I just rewatched it not terribly long ago, and that's American Graffiti. She's like the mysterious blonde in the Thunderbird that Richard Dreyfuss is chasing around all night long.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to her. By the way, the Thigh Master is like a pop culture staple. Like the Thigh Master, I cannot tell you how huge that was when she came out with that. And then last but not least, want to shout out Piper Laurie
from Carrie's mom, right?
Carrie's mom, Carrie, which has been a finalist in the running for the last couple of years for our Halloween film. Might be our Halloween film next year, depending. It's a movie I really want to talk about, especially because it's the Palma film.
Mm-hmm.
And both Piper Laurie and Sissy Spacek are incredible in the film. Laurie even got I think the both of them actually got Oscar nominations for that film, which is kind of unheard of because it's a horror movie, and the Academy really doesn't respect horror as much as it should. I mean, we've had this discussion before, how I think that Toni Collette and Lupita Nyong'o were both robbed for Hereditary and Us, respectively. because I think they're phenomenal in those films.
You could also make since we're going to talk about her at some point tonight, an argument for Mia Goth, how she was probably snubbed.
And that's what I heard for Pearl.
Yeah.
That she should have been in the running. But also, Piper Laurie, she was in Twin Peaks, which I'm a big fan of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
She's in The Hustler, great movie. And I do think that she's in it more, but she has that great little bit in the beginning of The Faculty where she's the teacher and then she ends up killing Baby Newirth in the beginning with the scissors.
She's I always wanted to do that.
I always wanted to do that, yeah. It's a fun little cold open to the film. And I think she's really good in that. She's in more of it, but in that sequence especially. So shout her out. Jesus, that's 6 people we shouted out that died in the last month. Yeah, that's a lot, and Perry especially because he was young.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Suzanne Summers and maybe even Richard Roundtree were all that old. Richard Roundtree may have been like late 70s, but Suzanne Summers wasn't terribly old either.
I think she had been battling breast cancer for the past 25 years, which is a hell of a run.
Yeah.
Also.
R.I.P. And check out some of the great work that they did. Even if I'm not a Friends fan. Well, what about you? That's all the news I have, Fit.
All right, I have a few. Filmmaker Edgar Wright is going to be remaking Running Man, and the production is looking to boot up in 2024.
Well, we kind of touched on this when we did Total Recall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like Running Man, or The Running Man, the Schwarzenegger movie. I think it's really cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of his weaker films, especially because that came out the same year as Predator, which is far superior.
Yeah, of course.
But like the novella, the Richard Bachman / Stephen King novella that movie is based off of is really good and really dark. And I told you that there's stuff in that they wouldn't do in a film because it would be in really bad taste.
Mm-hmm.
These days, and I can tell you off air what that was if I haven't said it on there, because I don't want to ruin it if Edgar Wright's taking it in that direction. I just don't think that that the ending of the novella would be the ending of the movie these days, because it's too close to real life. But the novella is really good. And it's more of a game show that people take on because they have to survive. Like, they need the money, and they have to do this. So I would be interested to see what his take on it is. It's got to be better than what got made back in 1987 with Schwarzenegger.
That's exactly what I thought that you would say, since you're not a fan. Well, I don't really care about the Schwarzenegger's Running Man. I think it's like lower tier for him.
Exactly, it's a lower tier.
So, and that's... and that's the kind of properties that I think that they should be focusing on. Ones that really haven't aged well or weren't good, rather than trying to redo stuff that is timeless or untouchable. Like, they're actually onto something with this one. So hopefully he can pull something out. Blumhouse's Five Nights at Freddy's opened up this past weekend and has absolutely murdered the box office, bringing in $130 million worldwide against its $25 million budget already.
What's do you know what its domestic numbers are for the weekend?
I know it brought in $8 million just on Thursday preview night, which is
that's pretty good for. Yeah. Let's see. I was just looking at box office stuff today, trying to figure out Suspiria's U.S. release date, but I couldn't find anything. Five Nights at Freddy's made $78 million.
Over here?
Wow. Yeah, wow.
You know what it is that it's based on a kid's video game. So then you have all of these parents, it's like what's that called? Super Mario Bros.
Mm-hmm.
Where all of these families are going to go see this. And what's even more impressive about this is that it dropped simultaneously on Peacock, and it's still making that kind of money.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, it was on. I watched 30 minutes of it at midnight on Thursday night.
Wow, so yeah, simultaneous release and made that much money. That's insane. I mean, you and I are both the same. Like, if I had my chance, I would rather watch a movie in the theater.
Yeah.
As opposed to, here at home, because we like going to the movies.
Yeah.
So I would definitely be one of those people that would go see it in the theater. But hey, man, good for that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they picked the right date. It's, right before Halloween and people are in the spirit. So I'm glad they're going out and supporting indie horror stuff like that,
Yeah, awesome.
Also, Matthew Lillard's in it, so that's pretty cool.
Shout out to Matthew Lillard. He's great.
And now it's time for the weekly recommendations.
What have you been watching since we spoke last?
Not a lot, given my my work schedule. I did make time. I wanna shout it out, but more so like his work in general. I did watch The Fall of the House of Usher. I enjoyed it a lot. I know that some people might argue that his shows, Mike Flanagan shows, aren't really horror. They're more so like family dramas with some horror elements in it. To that I say, so what?
You can say that for Ari Aster, too.
Yeah, exactly. I think about Hereditary all the time. But I really enjoyed The Fall of the House of Usher. It's got some good creepy scares. It's got some really great kills. I kind of like how Flanagan has become this guy like Wes Anderson who kind of collects more actors for his repertory theater, his repertory players with each project that he makes. So then it's just like, here's 30 people that have already been in almost all of his properties and then like a few others.
It's like American Horror Story, but good.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Flanagan's actually talented, unlike Ryan Murphy. I'll give that a recommendation. If you're a big fan of Flanagan, you'll like it. If you're not, you probably won't. So, don't waste your time if you know you're not a fan of his stuff. But I really highly recommend Midnight Mass if you haven't seen that. And I don't remember, did you watch it yet?
I saw that, and then I watched the what's the one with the kids? Is it Midnight
Club?
Midnight Club, yeah, that one.
That's the one I haven't seen yet. That's one I need to catch up on.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason I watched Fall of the House of Usher right away is because it's like starting right now, and I got a little bit of time, so I'll watch that. It's also around Halloween, so I'm trying to get in some scary stuff before the holiday drops, even though I haven't had much time. But Midnight Mass is the one for me that I think is his best work for TV or for Netflix. That one is really good, even though that one is frustrating in a couple scenes because a character will do a 3 to 5 minute monologue instead of just saying, yeah, that sounds fucked up. It's like a normal person would. They're like, let me tell you this story for like the next 5 minutes. And that's how it relates to all the fucked up stuff that's happening here. So that's pretty funny. But the themes and the dialogue and what's discussed and what is represented in that show in Midnight Mass is phenomenal. So that's been my favorite of his shows. And I do want to give a shout out to The Haunting of Hill House, which is great for like 9 episodes and then completely shits the bed in the last. So that's one that really bugs me, even though everything that comes before it is so goddamn good. So let's watch some Mike Flanagan shows, and I will check out the Midnight Club. But yeah, I think it's funny that as I'm watching that Fall of the House of Usher, I'm like, these people have been in at least 3, no less than 3 Flanagan projects each. And some of them, like Carla Gugino or Bruce Greenwood, have been in virtually all of them.
No complaints here. I like it.
No complaints. And, watch Dr. Sleep. I do want to give a shout out to the OG Exorcist. I don't think I need to recommend that very hard. We've been talking about William Friedkin a handful of times in the last few months. So it's gotten brought up. You and I were talking the new Exorcist movie before we got on air, because I asked if you had seen it and what were your thoughts on it, because I hadn't and don't know if I will until it's on like HBO or something. So go watch The Exorcist, William Friedkin's film. It's excellent. It's, as far as my opinion goes, the best horror movie of all time. Even if, people can watch it today and say, oh, that's not really scary. It doesn't have to have a jump scare to be scary, If you ever get a chance to watch it in the theater, if you haven't seen it in the theater, watch it in the theater. The sound design is incredible in the theater. I have a bunch of horror films sitting on my DVR, like older horror films that Turner Classic Movies has been playing over the course of the month that I have yet to watch, including one of my favorites, one of my perennial Halloween movies I watch, and that's The Haunting from 1963, the original. Skip the remake because it's garbage. But the original Haunting is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I watch it pretty regularly around Halloween for like the past 4 or 5 years since I've seen it originally. So I will recommend that, but I know I've recommended that on Halloween past. So what do you got, man? And did you like what you saw of Five Nights at Freddy's, which I should have asked 10 minutes ago?
Thank you for asking. No, it's all right. Makes sense. So I put it on. I knew I was probably going to fall asleep, but I wanted to check it out, do a little preview, basically so I could tell myself whether or not I wanted to make the effort to go to the theater to watch it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I never played the video game, but I've seen a couple walkthroughs and whatnot. I'm familiar with the lore, and 30 minutes in, they got me. I thought it was a great hook. I think it's well acted, well staged. The animatronics are real. They're created by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, so that's cool in itself. But to answer your question, 30 minutes in, and I thought it's pretty good, and it's not completely aimed at kids. I think that there's more to unpack there as an adult as well. So go check it out.
Cool. And how was Halloween Horror Nights? Since you and I haven't really crossed paths all that much in the last month.
It was awesome, man. And I think my girlfriend and I's experience was heightened because it was for her birthday. It was a birthday trip, so I went ahead and got the the fast pass for all the mazes, so we weren't having to wait in those ridiculous lines like 200 minutes for Stranger Things and shit like that. So we were able to hit
200 minutes is like 3.5 hours for those of you who are unfamiliar.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
For one maze, that's a 5-minute maze, probably.
Yeah.
5 to 8 minutes, maybe. And that's how beginning the night, all of the lines were pretty substantial. So splurging a little bit on the money was a good thing, and we got to do everything in the park. She was very happy. I had a lot of fun, and yeah, dude, all of the mazes were great. Standouts for me, I think, were The Last of Us was great. Evil Dead Rise was awesome. The staging that they did, where you feel like you're in that decrepit apartment building, was awesome. The Exorcist Believer was a pretty scary maze. Stranger Things is also was pretty fun. They had this. I think my favorite, surprisingly, was probably they had a Universal Monsters throwback, with like the Bride of Frankenstein and all of those like Invisible Man, all of those characters.
like Dracula and Invisible Man and Creature from the Black Lagoon and
Wolfman.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's something I would really dig going to.
Yeah, that was great. Like the just the practical makeup, and you could just tell that they put money into it all. It was awesome. There was a Chucky maze, which was great. At the end, there's like a giant, like 15-foot Chucky that comes popping up at you.
It was awesome. Definitely.
Cool, dude.
Watch Trick or Treat, because that's a great Halloween movie. This is a Halloween special, so I want to throw out at least something. Watch Trick or Treat. I think it's streaming on Max. It's great.
One of the girls I work with has a like a backpack purse
Of Sam?
and yeah.
Nice. Very nice. You've seen it, right?
Yes, I've seen it. I've seen it, yeah. And I was like, oh, hey, I recognize that.
So yeah, check out Trick or Treat if you haven't somehow. And we also did an episode on it a few years ago. So
that's right. That was where I first heard it, and I decided to watch it based off of that.
Awesome.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now for the movie focus of the week.
All right, so this week we're talking about the original Suspiria. It's rated R. It's from 1977. It's a horror mystery. It runs at 99 minutes, and it's got a 94% on Rotten. It's written by Daria Nicolodi and Dario Argento, directed by the great Dario Argento, starring Jessica Harper, Stefania Cassini, Flavio Bucci, Miguel Bosé, Alida Valle, Udo Kier, and Joan Bennett. The film follows a young American woman named Susie Banyan, who travels to Germany to study ballet at a highly respected dance school. After a string of bizarre occurrences and murders, Susie starts to slowly reveal that something deeply sinister is indeed afoot within the walls of the academy. Argento and Daria Nicolodi collaborated on the film's script, with Nicolodi incorporating various fairy tale touches to the material. However, the idea for the ballet school and black magic backdrop was inspired by a now debunked story told to Nicolodi by her own grandmother. The original script was supposed to be a school of young kids ranging from the ages of 8 to 10, but for obvious reasons, the film's frontrunners were very nervous and decided to change that aspect eventually. Production took place both in Rome and Munich, with many of the film's key sets being constructed specifically for the film. Argento turned to cinematographer Luciano Tovoli to help create the specific look of his vision, notably trying to capture the spirit of Disney's Snow White. 2 used anamorphic lenses and Technicolor prints, which allowed them the ability to manipulate primary colors throughout the film. Due to Suspiria being considered an Italian film, this resulted in a great deal of overdubbing during post-production, something that was common practice for that time. 20th Century Fox secured the American rights in 1977, but held back from release due to some of the film's graphic violence, but they eventually dropped the film in July of 1977, cutting a total of 8 minutes to secure an R rating. The film was a success, with Suspiria being the highest-grossing film for Dario Argento in the United States. Overall, the film may not be for everyone, but deserves to be viewed at least once by every genre fan before they die. Vivid visuals and an incredibly effective soundtrack by rock outfit Goblin makes for a true out-of-this-world experience. Light on the plot and heavy with mystery, you've likely never experienced anything quite like this nightmare for the ages. 4 Covens out of 5. Thank you.
I think even the soundtrack over like some of the score, it's like witches.
Yes.
Well, good write-up, dude.
Thank you, man.
Good write-up, and I think you touched on why this movie is so well known, at least among genre fans, and that's its incredible visuals.
Yeah.
Because just rewatching it again, especially on Blu-ray with like the restoration, the 4K digital restoration, it looks incredible.
How long have you had that?
3 or 4 years now.
Okay.
No, I was gonna say they had a special edition DVD that was out maybe 20 years ago that I picked up. And then when I hooked it up on Blu-ray, I got the restoration. But the DVD version that I had was like a collector's edition, which I still have. I didn't get rid of it. It was a 3-disc collector's edition, which had the unrated cut of the movie, which we'll get into here in a little bit because there are differences. It had special features, including like an almost hour-long making of documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third film was like the soundtrack. They only made 60,000 copies. So my copy, I looked it up this morning, is number 48,058.
Did you see it? Is it worth money?
Probably, if they only made 60,000.
I'm assuming you have it. It's in pristine condition.
Yep. It is unwrapped, but that's only because I've watched it multiple times on DVD.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure that it is worth money. But I never wanted to get rid of it, A, because I knew it was a limited edition, but also because like it's got the soundtrack with it, which is really cool. Do you want to know what date that actually got released, the DVD?
Yeah, what's the date?
September 11, 2001.
Oh, no. When did you actually pick it up?
Probably a couple of years after that. Down in my Best Buy days where I used to haunt that place all the time and come home with movies every single time I went there. Speaking of things that sell out and are limited, I saw today that Mondo has a new version of the Suspiria soundtrack on vinyl.
And it's this original one?
Uh-huh.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So check that out if anyone is so inclined and really digs the soundtrack, which is very distinct and runs constantly throughout the movie.
You know, I was watching a couple video essays, and one guy was saying how he constantly tries to show this movie to people who've never heard about it, and that one of his friends said they had to shut it off because the music was so annoying.
It's not annoying, it's just constant.
Yeah, it's kind of like Carpenter's Halloween theme, you know?
Yeah.
If you're not accustomed to that, I could see how it would be like, oh man, this is overbearing, or, you know, I can't focus or whatever. I could see it. Doesn't bother me because I'm a fan of music and movies, but not everybody is, you know. But I thought that was interesting. Sorry to cut you off.
You're not cutting me off at all. That is an interesting story because I think the soundtrack is awesome. And I don't think it takes away from the movie. It's not playing on like underneath every single scene. It's usually just popping up when it's pretty much visuals anyways.
Yeah. There's just like cues, visual cues that go along with the music.
Whether it's chimes or bells or like a xylophone or something. There's that. There's, you know, a lot of percussion to it. There's a lot of strings. There's a drum, which I think is an Irish drum, which it sounds like this has as well in it. I could be wrong. I would love to get a list of the instruments used in making this score. But it's very unconventional, and if you're ever looking for music to put on for like a Halloween party, or, you know, if you're passing out candy to kids or something on the Halloween, this is a soundtrack to put on. Did you know that they had it written and recorded before the movie was even shot?
Oh, okay. So this was something that just came strictly from them, and they had no idea what it was going to look like.
Yeah, I think much like Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone did. The music was written and recorded before the movie was even shot, and then Argento on set would play the music, kind of get the actors in that mood.
Oh, okay. That's cool, yeah. That's how he was able to get it to match.
Yeah, probably shot and edited to, you know, the pieces of music that Goblin did. Or Goblins, if you read the credits at the beginning. Yeah, Argento would play the score at full volume on set to unnerve the actors and elicit genuinely scared performances out of them. Pretty effective soundtrack to do that. And here's a list of the works they did with Argento: Deep Red, Suspiria, Tenebra, Phenomena, Opera, Sleepless, The Card Player, Masters of Horror. Remember that TV show?
Yeah, I do.
Toby Hooper, John Carpenter. I think John Carpenter? Maybe just Toby Hooper contributed to that. Mother of Tears, Dracula 3D, and an upcoming movie called The Sandman. I have seen Phenomena. I have seen Opera. I'm not big on opera, but I've never seen The Mother of Tears.
That's pretty crazy that it took him 40 years to complete this trilogy.
But yeah, I mean, check out some of those movies. Some of them are very, very good, and some of them are shitty, like the Dracula 3D movie. And there was another one I remember watching that isn't good, but I don't remember the name of that. That was like one of the later ones, like in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the soundtrack. The soundtrack by Goblin is pretty nuts, but it's it is pretty unnerving listening to it. I was listening to some of it just isolated when I was at work today.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely a creepy score without the visuals. I mean, obviously, you and I are sitting down to talk about it. It's Halloween. It's our Halloween film. how did you get into this movie? How did you see it?
I think I started getting into like the Italian horror stuff in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to seek it out. I think I rented this probably at Hollywood Video back in the day when I first watched it. You know, when streaming wasn't an option, you had to make do with what you had, right? So yeah, I remember. I'm pretty sure this Argento, the original Suspiria, was probably my introduction into his work, and it's pretty wild. Like I said in my write up, I still don't think there's anything quite like this, or like that. The feelings that you feel watching it, like it's very anti-structure, and things that happen even within the context of the film, it feels like it's not even really happening because it's so based in surrealism.
But it's exactly what he and Nickelodeon were going for. And I should mention that Nickelodeon was at the time his wife. They were partners for a very long time, and she's either a writer or an actor or both in a lot of his films from like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
I don't know when exactly they did split. She's unfortunately dead now. She died a few years ago. What they were going for was kind of this surrealist fairy tale. And it very much feels and obviously looks like that, as you said in your write-up, like they were going for that. That's why the very, very deep reds and the bright greens. I have some of the technical information on that stuff, but they're going for this expressionism, this German expressionism type fairy tale, and that's exactly what it feels like. You know, the young girl, kind of naive, that gets mixed up in all this. There's crazy set pieces and surrealist images. So yeah, I agree with you that this is definitely a distinct movie that there really isn't a whole lot like it. And those movies that are like it are most likely imitators or homage. Doing this, you mentioned, they shot in anamorphic lenses, which you can tell because when you watch the movie, you can see the edges of the film kind of bending.
Yeah.
The edges of the image. And then there's a couple of scenes where, there's an actor kind of on the far edge of that, and they look really stretched out. Almost not necessarily like the shot with the fisheye, but you can see the image kind of bending at the edges. I mean, the production design is excellent. They really emphasize those primary colors, particularly the red. I mean, the building is red. There's a lot of red lighting. The interior hallways are mostly red. There's the deep blue of like what I would call like the lobby or the common area of the school with the grand staircase that comes down. If your hallways are red, there's a lot of red lighting, like that turns people into crazy people and the psychos.
Is it true that they were able to manipulate those colors like in post?
Yeah. It's the Technicolor
with the print.
Yeah, the Technicolor print. It's called imbibition, and it uses dye instead of emulsion. And there's a lot of famous older films that did that. Wizard of Oz is one where if you're familiar with the Wizard of Oz, there's the very vivid colors. Gone with the Wind is another movie where there's like these deep reds, especially in the sunset scenes. So they use that to enhance the color, and it's I think the last feature to be processed with that process. Because by the early 70s, that process was dying out. I think I read that Godfather Part 2 was the last American movie to use that process. And then Suspiria is one of the final ones, and it was done on the last remaining Technicolor imbibition machine in Rome. And then that dye process transfer, it ends in the late 70s, but it had a bit of a resurgence in the late 90s, about 20 years later, because a lot of older movies were getting restorations. So The Wizard of Oz had the big restoration in 1998. Rear Window had a big restoration. Apocalypse Now in 2000, like early 2001, mid 2001. They all used that process, and I think I think I read even the Star Wars special edition movies had used it, or George Lucas had used that process to preserve the original negatives when they were going to do the special editions, like kind of as an archival print. He used that process. And then there were some newer movies around the time that used it. I saw The Thin Red Line and Pearl Harbor had both used that dye process. And then that process completely was discontinued in 2002.
When you say discontinued, does that technology not exist anymore? Like it can.
Now apparently it's all digital.
Oh, okay.
In that time, like a lot of film editing and processing, post work was all done on film. The editing tables, I forget what they're called now. They didn't. There wasn't a big push with the digital editing until later.
Mm-hmm.
And now, you can take a computer, you can go in and change the colors. But back in the day, like, you were still working with film and using like the dye process in order to bring those colors. The Technicolor 3-strip process, if you've ever heard of that. So it's really cool. And even now, like, I have it on in the background. And when Susie when she finally discovers, like, what room or where they hide out in the school, there's a lot of really, really deep blue curtains in the velvet curtains when she goes in, when she finds like the secret room through the blue iris on the wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It looks amazing. If you've ever seen the beginning of Blue Velvet, like the credit sequence of Blue Velvet, or like the title card, it looks exactly like that. The curtains that she goes through, but it gives it this really incredible look. If you remember Last Night in Soho, Edgar Wright did a lot of that work with with a lot of the reds and the blues, because that was an homage to the Giallo films, in which Dario Argento is, one of the masters of that.
But the other day I was reading how when you watch filmmakers such as, or I should say modern, like Nicholas Winding Refn, who he's notorious for his lighting, very neon soaked. Apparently he does that because he is actually colorblind in real life.
Oh, so he uses the vivid primary colors.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you say that, I always think of like the Only God Forgives poster and the cover, that artwork, because it's that red and blue neon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I got into this movie because I used to be an Entertainment Weekly subscriber, and they had an issue, I don't know if that was 98, 99, whenever that was, that listed like the 25 scariest movies of all time, according to them.
Yes.
And Suspiria was on that list, and I had seen a bunch of them. I could not for the life of me in my research find the entire 25 film list. The best I could do was like a top 10. But Suspiria was, I think, number 18 on the list, and it was one that I hadn't seen, so I was really interested to check it out. And then, much like you, I went to Hollywood Video and discovered it, and really, really fell in love with it, and was telling a couple friends of mine, "Oh, you should watch this movie. Like, it's insane. It's crazy violent in these scenes, but also like the look of it is incredible."
What's interesting about, or what I find interesting about it, is like, yeah, there is a lot of visceral violence, but it's like evenly kind of peppered through. Like, it's not torture porny, or like
no, some of his other movies are so much more violent than this.
But man, that opening kill,
the opening 2 kills are brutal.
Oh yeah, it is 2 kills. Technically.
Yeah, because Patricia's friend gets killed by the falling glass.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets impaled and then gets like a pane of glass like right through her face.
And you don't see it happen, but you see the aftermath, and it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, but Patricia gets stabbed. She gets accosted, and because she sees the arm reach, or she sees something outside the window.
Mm-hmm.
She's the girl at the beginning that is running away from the school that Susie sees as she's arriving, and then she goes to hide out like in a friend's apartment or hotel, whatever that is, and is scared, and there's noises, and she looks outside and she sees something outside, and all of a sudden that arm comes through the window and grabs her and smashes her face up against the glass, and then chases her out onto the roof where they stab her a bunch of times brutally. And then even as she's dying, she keeps getting stabbed, and there's that close up of like her exposed heart.
Yeah.
And the knife like piercing her heart a couple of times, and then gets shoved through the glass. I don't know, the glass ceiling or the skylight.
It's like
that's above the lobby.
Stained glass, right? I think.
Yeah, the stained glass skylight that's above the lobby of that hotel or the apartment building, whatever it is. Gets hung by the cord or the wire, whatever got pulled off of the roof. Gets tossed down through the skylight where she gets hung, but the falling glass kills her friend. And after she gets hung, there's a shot of blood dripping down off of her body on the floor, and then the camera pans over and you see her friend lying on the tile underneath her, impaled by some of the framing from the skylight, and then with a pane of glass from that skylight just bisecting her face.
Yeah.
So it's really fucking brutal. And I think that was like one of the things where when I was telling my friends that I worked with at the time about this movie, I was like, yo, you should check this out. Like, this opening murder scene is insane.
I really don't think I don't think that's really matched through the rest of the movie. Like, that's it. That's probably the highlight kill of the entire thing.
Oh yeah. And in my research, he wanted the opening murder to be so shocking that it would undermine the audience's expectation for what comes later in the film.
Oh, okay.
Which besides one kill, which we'll talk about here in a moment, I don't think there's anything as brutal as those opening kills, or the opening kill with collateral damage. But when Sarah dies, when Susie's friend Sarah gets killed.
Oh yeah, okay.
You know, she's being pursued by the killer, and she gets like smashed through like the window or something, and then runs into a room to hide, and locks the door, but the straight razor is trying to come up, like to undo the latch on the door. So she runs and crawls through a window, and there's like an open door just past this room that she has to get through. So she jumps down off, the perch that she was on into a pile of razor wire, which, first of all, is ridiculous because the room is just like full of razor wire. It's not like spooled up or anything. It's just like haphazardly on the floor.
Like in the entire room. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's 3 feet deep. It's like a room that's 3 feet deep with razor wire, which is ridiculous, but also makes for a good gory murder. But she gets tangled up in it, and as she's trying to escape, it just, it tangles worse and worse, and she's just getting more and more cut up. And then finally, she kind of like forces her way to the doorway, the killer comes through and slashes her throat. It's pretty brutal, but there's like a very close-up of the razor slashing her throat.
Yeah, the prosthetics, and it looks like vicious.
Yeah, that razor wire and then getting your throat slashed is a shitty way to go.
What's that famous painter with a mustache? What's his name?
Oh, Dolly.
Dolly.
Yeah.
Doesn't he have like that?
Oh, the short film
with the
Un Chen Andalou, I believe.
With the eye.
Yeah,
that's
with
him.
The razor
right?
cutting the eyeball. Yes, that is him.
Yeah, that's what that reminds me of.
I'm sure that was where they drew some inspiration from. But that's a brutal kill, and then even when the piano player gets killed, it's pretty brutal because you see the dog just like munching on his neck. I sit down to watch this movie. I was so busy I had to watch it in 2 halves over 2 nights the first time around because I just did not have the time to sit through like a 90-minute movie one night because I was coming home at like 7:30, 8 o'clock, and I'm in bed by 9:30. So because I'm up at 4 a.m. the next day. So I had to watch this in 2 parts. So I watched it because Turner Classic Movies had it or had it streaming. And then I realized, something's weird, like stuff is missing. And I realized that I was watching like the cut version because it literally just, by the way, before I get into this, you want to know what's hilarious that always makes me laugh? You see this brutal kill in the beginning. You see these 2 women get murdered, or the one woman gets murdered. Like I said, the other is collateral damage. And then it the camera pans over this gory scene, and then all of a sudden it just like cuts to the piano player just like walking his dog. And it makes me laugh because it's such like a jarring cut.
Yeah.
But they cut out so much of like all of his scene because like his dog ends up fighting the kid. And then there's like a long scene where he's playing the piano, and then Miss Tanner, one of the matrons at the school, comes in, yells at him in front of everybody, and then kicks him out. And, you know, he talks shit back to her and everything and says that he's happy to be leaving. All that. That whole entire scene is cut.
Why would they do that?
I have no idea, because at one point he's just like randomly walking his dog, and then there's spooky stuff happening, and you can kind of hear and see the witches in the shadows.
Uh-huh.
And then the dog turns on him and kills him. And when I was watching the cut version, I was like, wait a minute, there's absolutely no context for him being killed.
He's just like fodder.
Yeah. And then I was like, oh, I'm watching the cut version. So I went back and grabbed my Blu-ray and put that in. You know, that scene is there in the original version. I'm just wondering why that's cut. Because when they released it in America, they cut 8 minutes out of it, and you figure it would be like a lot of the gore, a lot of the violence. But no, they literally cut like pretty much all of that guy's scenes. You just see him walking the dog, you see him play the piano, and then you see him getting killed later on in the movie. But there's that long scene where you find out that his dog bit the kid, because the kid has very Damien from the Omen vibes. Yeah, and then there's another, before he gets killed, you see him like at not the bar, but like the German beer house.
Mm-hmm.
You see him like there having a good time, and then he gets up and he leaves, and he's walking down the street, and then he enters the plaza where he gets killed. But I was watching that, and I was like, oh, having just watched a cut version, it was, the stuff that wasn't cut, or the stuff that was cut wasn't necessarily like violent stuff. It was basically all of his scenes, and some trims here and there. But excuse me, for some reason, I don't know why they cut those scenes in the American release, because like I said, there's zero context for why that guy gets killed. I know that the close-up of the blood dripping on the floor after Sarah is hung,
mm-hmm.
Not Sarah, after Patricia is hung, and then the close-up of what happened to her friend, how her friend died, I think that is cut out, and all you see is like a wide shot of the aftermath of Patricia falling through the skylight. But it's basically like little trims, and like those two big chunks of Daniel, the piano player, that are cut from the American release. Basic plot of the movie is, there's an American girl that comes to Germany to a dance academy, and strange things are afoot. Later discovers that the academy is run by a coven of witches. Gets some helpful info by a heavily dubbed Udo Kier, which is funny if you're familiar with him. I know you are, but if your listeners are familiar with him, he has a very distinctive kind of deep voice.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really funny, like listening to him dubbed, because the voice absolutely is not what I would expect to come out of Udo Kier's mouth. And he's like housing like a glass of wine or something. He's like sitting there talking to her, and it's like he's drinking like he hasn't had a drink in 2 weeks. So get some info, and then unfortunately has her friend Sarah killed. And then she, given the information that she got from both Sarah before her death and the professor, she goes and confronts the head witch, Helena Marcos, who supposedly runs the academy, but no one has ever seen her. And then she comes face to face with her, defeats her, and brings down the coven of witches. That's the basic plot of the film. Like I said, the movie is not heavy on plot, and honestly, it's one of those movies that doesn't need to be, because it's pretty effective for what it is.
And also, if we're talking about that, you can say that for a lot of stuff.
Oh, John Wick is a pretty fucking simple
mm-hmm.
setup.
But the execution is what it gives it longevity. There's
a movie that I think you and I are going to talk about next year. We'll have a discussion off air as to whether or not it's considered sci-fi. But there's another movie that I think is very, very light on plot, heavy on something else, and it doesn't need a whole lot of plot because the movie is so fucking effective with what it has that it doesn't need to have some intricate plot.
You have the right team, you can make something good.
If you know what you're doing, and Argento does this. And just having this movie on in the background, I mean, visually, this movie is stunning. Not just the over-the-top kills, but, the production design and, the extreme lighting in some of those scenes.
Yeah, it feels very, very meticulously thought out as far as, like, the production design, the interiors.
Mm-hmm. And when we get to the point where I read you some reviews, that's some things some of the things that get highlighted. So I think you mentioned in your opening, this movie is dubbed, and you can tell the Italian way of filmmaking at the time was kind of record the movie without sound and then dub everything over later. This gets a good joke in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where they talk about that when DiCaprio goes to Italy and is making movies and isn't really a fan of how everyone just kind of speaks in their own language.
Mm-hmm.
And then they dub them over later for whatever market it's going to be released in. But I mean, there are English speaking actors in the movie, and you can tell. And Jessica Harper, who plays Susie, obviously is American. She's speaking in her native tongue. She's speaking English, but you can tell that a lot of the other actors who are either Italian or German are heavily dubbed. Olga, the one who's kind of like the mean girl in the beginning, is obviously dubbed. We talked about Udo Kier being dubbed. Apparently, the professor that Udo Kier then introduces Susie to, who tells her all about the witches, that guy spoke only German, to the point where Harper really couldn't follow him to react and say her lines opposite him. But the woman who plays Madame Blanc, I believe, is an American actress. And from what I understand, most, like the English language version, has the most actual recorded sound and dialogue in it. But I could be wrong. Yeah, that Albert kid is creepy as fuck in his little Dutch boy outfit. And his like blonde hair. He's creepy and weird. And he sells out Susie at the end. You know what's also kind of like fucked up is what's his name, Pavel?
Mm-hmm.
Who's like kind of like the manservant.
Yeah.
They're like, he like passes Susie and Madame Tanner on the stairs, and she's like, "Oh, he's ugly, isn't he?" It's okay. You can say whatever you want. He only speaks Romanian. She's like talking shit about him and talking shit about how he had all his teeth pulled because he had like gingivitis or something.
Yep.
He's all obsessed with that lighter. Sarah's lighter, which is another thing that's like oddly cut because you see Sarah playing with the lighter, but it's not really brought up or mentioned until Pavel brings the food into the room, and he like picks it up and looks at it, and Susie's like, "Oh, you better keep an eye on that lighter." Like he's, he seems to have an affinity for it. It's a cool lighter, and it's got a little clock in the middle. Yeah, it's like another like little odd piece that's kind of cut out.
Doesn't he plays with it towards the end, right? When she's...
Yeah, like when he's looking for Susie at the end, he's got it in his hand. He's using it to like light his way. Piece of research I came up with was Nickelodeon apparently was supposed to have the lead, was supposed to play Susie, but the studio wanted an American cast in the role so that the film would be more marketable internationally. Then she was intended to play Sarah, but I guess she had an injury. So she couldn't portray that role of Sarah. So they had another actress by the name of Stefania Cassini, and she took the role because she was a big fan of Argento's. Like I said, like Nickelodeon has roles in most of his films, especially in this period, but she's oddly missing from this one, and that's because she was injured and couldn't do it. She did co-write the script though. And it's funny, I did read that in the research you mentioned in the top, where apparently her grandmother had told her a story about going to like an academy to piano lessons, I think, take piano lessons.
Yeah.
And she was saying that there was some black magic shit happening, and then Argento later was like, "Yeah, that's all bullshit."
Yeah.
I'm looking up to see what other movie she wrote with Argento. Apparently Inferno. The Black Cat, which I believe is an Argento film, along with Suspiria, obviously. But she's in like a bunch of his movies. So yeah, it was interesting to realize that she's not in this movie because she was injured. She was supposed to be, but then she's not. You know, as we've kind of talked over, but this is the first in a loose trilogy called like the Three Mothers trilogy, and which was inspired by a piece that was written by Thomas de Quincey called Suspiria de Profundis. It's Latin for sighs from the depths. And this inspires Suspiria, Inferno, and the Mother of Tears. And this guy makes this assertion that there are three sorrows, as there are three fates, three graces, three sorrows. Mater Lacrimarum, which is Our Lady of Tears, which I believe is that the one in the Mother of Tears? That would have to be, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Mother Suspiriorum, which is Our Lady of Sighs, which is Suspiria, where Suspiria takes its name from. And then Mater Tenebrarum, which is Our Lady of Darkness, which is what Inferno is based around. So they, again, all these movies are unrelated to themselves. They're not actually sequels to one another. It's the trilogy is more of we use these ideas as a jumping off point to create this film around it. And I don't think that Mother Suspiriorum is mentioned in this movie per se. I think Udo Kier says like the Mother of Sighs at one point, but only as like a nickname to Helena Marcos. In the remake, you hear Mother Suspiriorum. You hear that mentioned more. But speaking of the remake, let's talk about the remake really quick.
All right, let's talk about it. 2018.
Luca Guadagnino directed it. Had done Call Me By Your Name previously. Did a movie last year, Bones and All, that you and I really enjoyed. Was supposed to have a movie coming out this year called Challengers, and that got bumped because of the strikes, unfortunately. The road to the remake was really interesting because in 2008, I think Guadagnino got the rights to the movie, and he offered it up to David Gordon Green. Speaking of David Gordon Green, you said that, he kind of gets like a lot of shit, especially in the aftermath of The Exorcist Believer. He got a lot of shit when this was announced. To be fair, at that time, he was kind of known more so for either comedy or dramas. Mm-hmm. He got his start making dramas and then kind of made a bit of a swerve in the comedy. And it was just coming off of Pineapple Express. But yeah, when that got announced, he gets a lot of hate for it, especially from Argento himself. And then it's rumored that Natalie Portman is going to play Susie, going to produce the film. And then for like however many years, 3-4 years, nothing really happens. And Green says, well, I'm still trying to make the movie. Back in 2012, it's announced that Isabel Fuhrman, who's an orphan, she's the girl in Orphan, was going to play the lead with Isabelle Huppert and Jana McTeer in supporting roles. And then nothing happened there. And in 2013, he said, well, it's probably not going to happen due to legal issues. And then says, the movie's dead because the budget's going to be too high. We can't make this movie with a higher budget because at that point in time, like the found footage genre is really blowing up. And those are cheaply made and not very good, in my opinion. There's very few of them that are decent. But apparently that's what killed it. But then Guadagnino still had the rights. So he decides to remake it using actors he had worked with before in a couple of projects. Tilda Swinton has worked with him many times. So she ends up in the remake playing 3 separate roles. One of which I had no idea was her until my friend told me later on. I had no idea that she was the Mother Suspiriorum because there's under so much makeup. Uh-huh. I had no idea that was her until a buddy of mine told me later on. He's like, oh, hey, like that was Tilda Swinton. Like I knew she was playing like the psychiatrist role, the Dr. Klemper, something like that. Who's a male. Mm-hmm. I knew that was her, and even watching it last night, there's plenty of scenes where you can tell that it's her because it's that her facial structure is pretty evident even under the makeup. But she's pretty good in it, in those 3 roles. She obviously her big role is Madame Blanc. She plays the head of the school, and then Dakota Johnson, who Guadagnino had worked with before, who I think is okay in the movie. I'm not wild about her role or wild about her performance. I think Dakota Johnson does a bit better with lighter material, but that's my opinion. If someone wants to challenge that, they can. And then Chloe Grace Moretz, who appears pretty much in the prologue of the film. And then you find out later on that she's been kidnapped and is being kind of tortured. Mia Goth, who I think is very fucking good in the movie. I didn't remember how big her role was and how good she was until I rewatched it last night. Jessica Harper, who plays Susie here, has a cameo in the film. And who has also worked with Guadagnino in Bones and All. She's got a cameo in Bones and All as well. For what my opinion's worth, I like the new version. I know that Guadagnino said it's not necessarily a remake, he's just calling it like an homage. But there's a lot of stuff that follows very closely to the original.
I feel like it's more than this new one. Feel free to challenge me on this, but the original Suspiria feels more akin to a slasher, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And this new one is more like psychological horror?
Yeah, it's a lot more elevated horror.
Uh-huh.
It's very in line with an A24 type horror movie, even though it's not A24. It was produced through Amazon.
Again, this new one, I'm sure a lot of people hated it. They don't understand it. It's fucking weird. Very weird.
It is weird. There is some pretty disturbing shit in it, though.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Especially like the nightmare stuff that Susie has. And then even though it's beautifully shot and edited and even scored, because like Tom York does the score for the remake, and it's really good.
Yep.
Even though it's obviously not as insane and as spooky as the Goblin score, it's more. This movie is more muted, both in its colors, its tone. It's got a whole undercurrent of like sadness to it, and that's what like the Tom York score is very sad, but that climax, which is so fucking brutal and gory, is very beautifully shot and edited. But I think that, yeah, like a lot of people hated it because it's not as elevated as the original. The colors are very muted. There's no vivid color in it.
He was smart in his execution because you don't want to try to imitate Argento. You want to do your own thing, and I feel like that's what we got.
Yeah,
you know, like as you said, like more of an homage that can stand on its own.
I think so. I mean, I really enjoyed it when I watched it back in 2018 when it came out, and rewatching it last night, I still very much enjoyed it, even though it's about an hour longer than this one. To me, it never dragged, but there's like the kills, even though they're not necessarily like murders, but the kills in this movie are in the remake are pretty fucking brutal too. When the girl gets like basically bent and folded and twisted up,
and you're watching, yeah, yep,
is very disturbing. When Sarah, the Mia Goth character, gets trapped and breaks her leg, it's very disturbing. And even what happens to Chloe Grace Moretz, like when you find out what happened to her, is pretty haunting. Yeah, I do enjoy the remake. I probably wouldn't rewatch it as many times as I've rewatched this one. No disrespect, I don't think Dakota Johnson is the greatest actress. So I think that maybe someone else could have done the heavier lifting in that film a bit better than she could. Whatever. I think she's okay in Bad Times at the El Royale.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she's bad in that. But I also, again, I think she does a bit better with lighter material. We stepped off to talk about the remake for a little bit, and it's Way to the Screen, which, by the way, the remake did not make much money. Apparently it bombed.
It is 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it's very, like, obscure material, you know? Not to say that you can't have success, but look at even Ari Aster. He went the longer route with Beau is Afraid, and that tanked as well. I believe that is the original Suspiria is also streaming now on Showtime. You can catch it on cable through Showtime. And it is, I think the original cut is also available on Tubi for free right now. So,
the cut with the 8 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
because I believe what's streaming on Showtime and what I saw from Turner Classics was the cut version.
No, the one on Tubi is the American, or not the American cut.
Helen Americos getting the needle through the neck is fucking brutal. It like pierces like right through her neck, and you can see it like come out on the other side.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And the effects at the end, they're really awesome. Like when after she kills Marcos, and then like the whole building is kind of destroying itself. You know, all the cracks are happening and things are exploding around her. Like the cracks in the walls as they're happening as Susie's going through the hallway. Those effects look awesome.
And that's really that's really happening, right? In real time?
Yeah. Yeah, that's in camera, on set practical effects.
The windows caving in.
To the point where I think Harper said that was the scariest thing that happened on set. Not the other scary shit, just like her having to run through the hallways while things are exploding and cracking and ripping all around her.
I'm sure it wasn't the safest.
Maybe playing a little bit fast and loose with the safety rules.
Yeah.
By the way, I read that Harper was in Brian De Palma's like Phantom of the Paradise, which is one of the very, very early De Palma movies that I haven't seen. But that's how she gets the role here for Suspiria, and she turns down a role in Annie Hall to do this movie, which good for her because fuck Annie Hall and fuck Woody Allen. I don't know if she was going to be the Annie Hall role though, because I think that was always going to be Diane Keaton. So I've only seen the movie once. So I was kind of whatever on it. It does have some good jokes, but overall it was just like, okay. But I wish I knew the role that Harper was going to play in Annie Hall that she turned down in order to do this. But good on her, because this is a much better film. After she kills Helena Marcos and she runs out, and then it cuts to that shot of Blanc and Tanner and Pablo all on the ground, and they're like screaming and they're all bloody and they're being killed because I don't know if it's Udo Kier or the other doctor that tells her basically, you know, I think it's the other doctor that tells her that killing the head of the coven is like cutting off the head of the snake. They're powerless without their leader. So, and in killing Marcos, the other witches or the other followers of Marcos are being killed as well. And then the whole place catches fire and burns as Susie just kind of like walks off into the night, into the rainy night.
And she's like laughing and smiling.
Yeah.
And then the credits roll all fucking crazy. It's just like...
Yeah. And the credits are a bit more like 70s. They're kind of like synthy. There's more synthesizer in those credits. I will tell you a movie that this really reminds me of color palette wise. And I tried to look if it was made using the same process, but I couldn't find any info that confirmed that for me. But it reminds me of Vertigo, with like the very, very deep red and green. We had this discussion when we talked about 12 Monkeys, because 12 Monkeys kind of does the same thing where Willis sees Madeline Stowe after she changes her look because they're on the run. And there's that like very, very deep red light in the room. And Vertigo does the same thing with the red and the green light.
I could see that, yeah.
So I looked to see if Vertigo was made using that same like Technicolor dye process, but I couldn't find any information that said so. But it really reminds me of that. You could not convince me that Argento wasn't influenced by the look of Vertigo when he made this movie. Okay, you want to get into some reviews and some post stuff?
Yes.
So as you mentioned, Suspiria gets released in Italy in February of 1977, and then 20th Century Fox acquires the rights. The 20th Century Fox logo at the beginning of this is awesome. It's like an older logo than the time now. It's like a logo from the 50s. They acquire it. They cut it by 8 minutes in order to achieve an R rating, even though the 8 minutes have virtually no violence in them. We've talked at length about what the majority of those 8 minutes are made out of. So the studio is still a little bit hesitant because it's of all the violent content in the film, so they're a little hesitant to release it. So they release it through a shell company called International Classics. But the film ends up being very successful for the studio and is Fox's 7th highest grossing film of that year. I will give you 3 guesses if you can tell me what the highest grossing Fox film of that year was.
Star Wars?
Yes, Star Wars is 20th Century Fox released the original trilogy. Even the prequel trilogy was still Fox owned the rights. But yes, 20th Century Fox releases Star Wars in 1977. That is the #1 movie of the year. I tried looking up box office information for Suspiria to see like what it opened against and how it did at the box office when it opened in July. But the only box office information I could find for the entire year was that Star Wars was like the #1 movie every single weekend for the majority of that year since its release. But Suspiria is the 7th highest grossing film for Fox that year. I would be curious to look to see what other Fox movies came out in 1977 besides Star Wars.
Do you know the DVD that you have? Is it Anchor Bay that released it? Do you know?
I think the DVD, the 60,000, the limited edition.
Uh-huh.
Yes, that is Anchor Bay. I think Anchor Bay is even the one that had the special edition of Halloween with the 3D cover that I gave you. So, Suspiria gets released, gets some mixed reviews, and if you're ready for them, I'm going to read you some of them right now. Janet Maslin of the New York Times said the film had slender charms, though they will most assuredly be lost on viewers who are squeamish. Yeah, people might not have been, at least on this side of the pond, might not have been used to a movie as violent as this, or as crazy as this. The San Francisco Examiner said it was mostly gore with little plot or intrigue. Gene Siskel writes Argento's direction was visually stylish, but he felt that Suspiria played like a weak imitation of The Exorcist, which I don't really get where he's coming from with that line of thinking. And he says it's inferior to Argento's debut film, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I don't get like Exorcist vibes off of this movie.
I think that was a reach for another big horror film that was of that era.
Probably. There's witches. I would put this more on par with like Rosemary's Baby.
You know what?
Before I would mention anything about The Exorcist.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that struck me. I was like, oh yeah, like this.
Yeah.
This feels like Rosemary's Baby, because it's very very shrouded in mystery, and you have no idea what's going on until towards the end.
Yeah, and even her like stalking through the hallway is very reminiscent of Mia Farrow going through the hallway, following the sounds of the baby until she discovers, the room where everyone's hanging out and the baby is in the crib. So yeah, I would have said Rosemary's Baby before I would have said The Exorcist. So yeah, you and I are in that same wavelength. The Boston Globe says it's a fitful, uneven piece of work, too often more uncontrolled than the hysteria it's trying to create. But it did get some favorable reviews from some lesser-known papers. Fort Lauderdale News likened the film to the works of Edgar Allan Poe and added, for the seekers of superficially devilish thrills, Suspiria is just the thing. And then this was one that I really enjoyed. The Colorado Springs Gazette says it's a film to experience, and for lovers of cinematic suspense, Suspiria may prove to be the most harrowing shocker ever filmed. That's pretty high praise. I mean, I would guess Suspiria is well known, but I think it's got more of a cult following, since it probably didn't connect as much with audiences back then, just because it was kind of so over the top.
Yeah.
But many film critics have praised its vivid colors, elaborate set pieces. Film scholar John Kenneth Muir said that each and every frame of Suspiria is composed with an artistic, remarkable attention to color. And AllMovie called it one of the most striking assaults ever committed to celluloid. This unrelenting tale of the supernatural was, and likely still is, the closest a filmmaker has come to capturing a nightmare on film. That one, I think, is pretty dead on. I mean, we've discussed earlier, we know that it's kind of a very dark fairy tale-like atmosphere to the film.
Mm-hmm.
AllMovie saying that's the closest the filmmaker has ever come to capturing a nightmare on film. That's pretty good. I told you Entertainment Weekly ranked it 18th on the 25 scariest films ever made. They tried like hell to look up what the 25 were. All I came across was a top 10. Do you want to know what the top 10 are?
Let's hear them.
Okay, starting from number 1, The Exorcist. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Alien, Silence of the Lambs, not a horror movie, Halloween, Jaws, Psycho, Seven, not a horror movie, The Shining, and Rosemary's Baby. Pretty great top 10. Again, The Silence of the Lambs and Seven are not horror movies. They're thrillers. Even Psycho probably is a thriller, not necessarily a horror film.
Yeah, I could see that. Definitely more crime thrillers.
I remember getting this issue and reading through it, and I had seen most of these movies, but there was still a few that I hadn't seen, so I sought them out, and Suspiria was one of the ones that I hadn't seen on it. I wish I knew what those other 15 movies were, or those other 14 minus Suspiria, so I could read them to you, but I tried like hell, and even through Entertainment Weekly's official website, they only listed the top 4 for some reason. So I'd have to see if I might still have that issue, but I kind of doubt it, but I just didn't have time to look for it.
Any final thoughts on the film?
I would definitely recommend it. I was talking to Joel the other night because we were hanging out, and he hadn't seen it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember you telling me about that movie and trying to get me to watch it. I just never got around to it." But because it's Halloween, close to Halloween, he's always trying to catch a few movies, especially ones that he hasn't seen before. So he was like, "Oh, maybe I should get around to watching Suspiria." He asked if he should, when he asked if I was ready to do the show and everything, and I told him, "Yeah, I am," except I kind of fucked up and I had watched the theatrical version, or at least what got released here, and not the uncut version. So I had to go back and watch that last night. I hung out with him Friday. And he was like, "Cool." He's like, "Let me know, which version I should watch." So I'm going to tell him, definitely watch the uncut original version because it's better, but also, again, at least you have context for why this one guy gets killed. By the way, when the bat flies into a room, fakest looking bat ever, but it's still pretty funny. It's definitely like a stuffed animal being pulled on a string, but it's pretty great. But yeah, I mean, check this movie out. Again, it's light on plot. If you're looking for something that's got an intricate plot like LA Confidential does, this is not the movie. But the look and the vibe, the score, the violence, it's definitely something to check out. You and I obviously both really enjoy this, or else we won't be talking about it right now. I'd be curious to know what someone thinks about it who's like a horror film fan who hasn't seen this movie. I'd be curious to get their thoughts. I mean, you would obviously recommend this movie, right?
Yeah, I think it's a classic.
Absolutely, it is a classic.
And like I said, going back to my write-up, it's probably something any genre fan should see at least once.
And check out some of his other movies if you got a chance. I mean, obviously, you and I have seen some, not a lot, of his other films. Again, Deep Red is one I highly recommend, and I would love to see Inferno, and I should watch Mother of Tears. I will. I believe both those movies might be on the Amazon watch list based off of what was there last night. Man, like the cinematography and the production design, the whole color scheme of this movie is gorgeous. Especially when you watch it like in a very well rendered digital version that's been restored. Watching it on the Blu-ray looks better than what I was watching off like Turner Classics.
All right, man. Teaser for next month, for November?
For November, we're going to do a movie from one of the greatest directors of all time. Kind of not necessarily an unknown movie, but one of the movies that slips through the cracks in his filmography. Movie that's, again, you and I and Joel absolutely love. Think it's so fucking underrated. Has a great lead performance. Has great supporting performances in it. Maybe I've said this on the podcast before. Maybe I haven't. All the times I ever watched one of this guy's movies in the theater, there were always walkouts for some reason. And this was one I distinctly remember people walking out of. Not like, 30 separate people walking out of it, but I remember like, a couple getting up and leaving in the middle of the movie. Maybe there was an emergency, but again, I've never been in a theater watching one of this guy's films that didn't have people walk out on it for some reason. And it's not like it was disturbing or there's like graphic violence or, sexual violence or something. None of that. a master filmmaker, one of the big filmmakers that we're covering this year, because our Christmas movie is going to be another movie from a very big filmmaker. But just a super underrated film I'm very excited to talk about, because I don't know if a lot of people really know about this movie, or a lot of people have even seen this movie. It's incredible. It's another movie that when it's on, I'll watch it all day long and enjoy it just as much, even though I've seen it 100 times and absolutely adore it. That good enough tease?
Yes.
I'm very excited to talk about it. And it might be hard to find, too, because it's definitely not on Blu-ray. It only has a DVD copy.
This, I know for a fact, it is available digitally.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, so they'll be able to pick it up once we announce what it is.
So, what's on your plate that's coming up for next week?
Okay, for context, before I announce what we're going to talk about, last week or so, I've been battling some kind of ear infection, which I just recently got over. And it was really hard I still went to work, very handicapped, where everybody sounds underwater. And
was your balance affected at all?
Yeah, equilibrium or whatever. It was very strange trying to work. I did get used to it for a bit of the time, and then, took medicine and got better. But it really, it really put things into perspective on how much like we depend on our senses and how important hearing is. And so, with that, I thought it would be appropriate to review The Sound of Metal.
Okay, I figured that's where you were going.
Because I was like, God damn, like I'm never going to take my hearing for granted ever again.
Hey, I'll tell you what, man. When I discussed this on the show a few months ago, maybe even longer than that, when I had the shingles in the spring, I was so shit scared about having my vision affected that it was like, I'll put up with the itching and the scarring and the pain so long as my vision doesn't get fucked up. And it was like, I'll put up with all of that. I was so worried about my vision in that eye being affected. So I can understand where you're coming from with that ear infection. Luckily, my vision wasn't affected. I got on medication in the proper time window, but I was never so scared for those 10 days as I've been in a very long time, because I was so worried about my vision. And even going to the optometrist back in, I think, July, when I had my annual eye exam, I'd seen the ophthalmologist, that week when I had them, just to verify, because I'd been in the ER and I'd been to urgent care, and both of them gave me an eye exam in the emergency room and in urgent care, that everything was okay. There was no trace of the virus in the eye. And then the ophthalmologist did the same thing and verified that for me, so I felt a lot better. But when I went for my eye exam in July, he was asking how the health was and everything, and I told him, I had shingles a couple months back, getting over it, had an ophthalmologist check on my eye, everything was okay with it. But I did have a little bit of light sensitivity in that eye for, a week or two. And he told me, he was like, if you had light sensitivity, then the virus got probably about as far as your optic nerve. And that scared me, even though it was obviously in the past by that point. But I was scared enough that it was like, oh, it was that close. It was marching right down the line. That was a big relief, but that was also very scary to know that I was very close to having possibly some vision issues. Long story short, I completely understand where you're coming from when you say, how much you take your senses for granted and how much you rely on them. As far as everything looks now, you can't even really tell that anything happened. Riz Ahmed, yeah, the dude rules.
So if you're stumbling upon this podcast, we go by Drop the Mic. We operate out of San Diego, California, and we are available on a plethora of podcast platforms, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Luminary, you name it, we're on there. Check us out. Give us a 5-star rating, a little nice review. If you have a couple extra seconds, we appreciate it endlessly. And thank you to all of our listeners. who continue to give us the streams. We appreciate it. And thank you for the participation in the polls we've been doing lately. Pretty awesome. We did a big giveaway for October, which we had just under 100 players. Thank you to everybody that played, and the big winners as well. Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
There was a runner-up prize, and they still got a director's cut of The Exorcist.
Hey, I'd be happy just to get that. That's an awesome movie, obviously, as we've talked about it multiple times tonight, but also the director's cut is really good.
It is.
Thank you. You always thank me for being so accommodating, but I really think it's you who accommodate my busy schedule.
Anytime, man, because you're always brilliant on the show, and you make my job easy. You make my job easy for once, one episode out of each month.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say brilliant. You're welcome. I do enjoy sitting down and talking a movie.
Happy Halloween, everybody. Be safe out there.
Happy Halloween.
This is our Halloween episode. So hopefully everybody is listening, tuning in, and go get some candy. Be safe. Watch some spooky stuff. And until next time, this is Wesley Swanson, Chris Pawlak, signing off, saying good fight and good night.
Good night.
Well, what is it?
I just wanted to talk to you about some of the things that have been happening here lately.
It's useless to try and explain it to you. You wouldn't understand. It all seems so absurd, so fantastic. All I can do is get away from you as soon as possible.